This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Naomi is the Mellon Fellow in Cities and Humanities at the London School of Economics. She completed her PhD at Rykwert Department of History of Art. Her thesis concentrated in post-apartheid urban transformations in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Her current research examines alternative forms of public memory in urban contexts and the potential of collective memory and the heritage of participatory, democratized practices.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, great. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to speak a little bit more about memory and a little bit less about utopia in this conversation, although there is definitely some utopian planning that comes into some of these cases. So what I'm going to look at in this paper is two quite different modes of representing and working with memory in the public urban space, both in the city of Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. So one of these is a project where where kind of formalized space of memory in the form of a cultural precinct that was centered on a historical museum, or a museum of struggle, as it's called, and was positioned as a kind of driver of urban change and transformation. In actually what is a very utopian project, as we'll see, but also one that has been resoundingly rejected by residents who live in the vicinity of this cultural precinct. And then in the second part of the paper, I'm going to look just briefly at another case where there's no built structure for memory, but where practices of memory have been kind of layered into the urban landscape itself in a way that's accessible through narrative and through kind of performative means. So I'm kind of looking at this question of what happens when the formalized space that's set aside for memory doesn't work as such. Where is that memory embedded in urban space? So the image in this first slide is the exterior of a space called the Red Location Museum of Struggle, which is in Port Elizabeth, which is a kind of industrial port city in South Africa, in a region called Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. And it's located into the area that it's in. It's called Red Location, and it's in the township of New Brighton, which is about 15 kilometers north of the Port Elizabeth city centre. And this is an area that historically was really a kind of hotspot of the liberation struggle in South Africa and the anti-apartheid struggle, and especially so in this neighbourhood during the 1980s, which was a really, really intense period of struggle and a very violent period in the country's history. It's also a space with very long histories of resistance, labour organisation, and political mobilisation. So Red Location as a neighbourhood dates to around 1902. Historically it's been mostly an informal settlement, although that has changed a little recently. And it was built when a set of these kind of barrack-like houses were built at the turn of the 20th century out of salvaged wood and red iron, which is what gave the location its name, the Red Location. And this was in a period when African people were being displaced out of the city centre. So as the city grew, there were what were then called native reserves that, as the city centre expanded, people were displaced from. There was a lot of discourse around kind of public health and outbreaks of bubonic plague and this kind of thing that was being used as a kind of as an excuse in cities across South Africa at that time for kind of widespread displacement out of cities. So a lot of resistance leaders come from this area or spend time in hiding here, and especially the sort of latter years of the anti-apartheid struggle are still very much in living memory in this neighbourhood. This is just to give you a sense of the space. So this is sort of in the southeastern corner of the South African coastline. So this is the city here, Port Elizabeth. The city centre is kind of down here, and Red Location is up there to the north. Okay, so this museum project that I'm speaking on here, it was really seen as a way to bring economic development and transformation sort of in the wake of the country's first democratic elections in the 1990s to a historically marginalized neighborhood. And the museum project was a way of using the recognition of this political history as a way to transform the neighborhood in material terms, really as a way to transform the kind of fabric of the space. So in planning for this cultural precinct, for which the museum was the first section, there's also an art gallery and a library and a planned performing arts centre and a whole lot of housing around the space. There was a lot of talk of this kind of promised tourist income and small business development that was going to come out of that. And this idea that this cultural precinct would create a kind of centre of gravity that was not in the city centre, but was kind of a historically privileged space and space of cultural production. So that would create this kind of centre of gravity that economic and social development would sort of accrue around in some way. And a lot of that was to be driven by tourism. So this was also really seen as a way to address these very persistent apartheid geographies in the South African city, which remains very segregated, even though that segregation is not legislated anymore. So just to give you a sense of what relocation looks like at present, this is from a couple of years ago. So you can see that it's kind of a mix of formal and informal housing. So these houses in the background here, these kind of colourful little sort of 3-room houses, were part of a housing project that was built in around 2003 to 2005, which I can speak about a bit later. But really, these houses were constructed after really vociferous protests directly linked to the construction of the museum. And prior to that, most of relocation looked like what you see in the foreground here, which is this kind of informal housing in the foreground. So it's worth, looking at the slide, it's worth just noting that the housing issue has been really contentious in relation to this project, basically since its inception in sort of the mid to late 90s. And there's been this constant tension between the idea of the cultural institution and the memorial institution as its driver of transformation, so both material and symbolic transformation, and the demand for addressing really pressing material needs as quickly as possible, in a situation of really quite extreme deprivation. This is one of the images from the 1998 call for competition entries to architects. So the cultural precinct was, it wasn't commissioned directly, it was put out to an open competition, which has been quite a common pattern in post-apartheid public architecture in South Africa. And so the competition brief that was sent out to architects is actually really interesting because it's full of these kinds of images of relocation residents. Some of them are sort of landscape images of streets, and a lot of them have these sort of quite strange, out of context quotes from sort of mid 20th century or sometimes late 19th century, really utopian texts that are quite interesting. So this one reads. So this is from an essay called March 19th from the collection Once Around the Sun by Brooke Atkinson, which dates to 1951. And the quote is, "Say yes to the seedlings and a giant forest cleaves the sky. Say yes to the universe and planets become our neighbors. Say yes to dreams of love and freedom. It is the password to utopia." It's a very interesting framing of what this project was meant to achieve. There was this real idea that the designers and the architects and the urban planners who were running this project would come in with this kind of utopian vision of the future South African city and redraw the physical landscape around this project that was very much centered on memory and on heritage. And in so doing, would fundamentally change the structure of the neighborhood while also honoring its memories and its history. And of course, in practice, this process has been quite a lot more fraught than that. So physically, in terms of the appearance of relocation, the museum project has had quite a dramatic effect on the neighborhood. So I just want to show you a couple of aerial images that kind of highlight this. So this was before the museum was built. So these kind of long houses these are the wood and iron barracks. So these actually date to sort of 1902 to 1904. So those are about 100 years old at that point. Most of this fabric here is informal settlement. These houses at the top are part of a state-subsidized housing project from around 97, 98. As part of a reconstruction and development program. And this is actually probably not exactly from 2014, but so basically sort of 10 to 15 years later, that's an aerial view of the same landscape. So a lot of this housing has been cleared, so people have moved up their houses to make way for the museum. So this is the museum building, which as you can see has a very large footprint. This is a library, and this is an art gallery, neither of which have actually been opened, although they were constructed in 2010. And the museum was a little prior to that opened in 2006. So while the museum was kind of staffed and made operational, the gallery and the library have never actually operated. And at the moment, planning is underway for the last phase of this project, which will be built here on this land over here. And that is a 1,000-seater theatre and a performing arts centre, along with 210 architect-designed subsidised houses. And that's just another aerial view, just to give you a little bit of a better sense of what it looks like in context. You can see the railway line at the top of that image. So this is more or less what it looks like at present. And this is also, so this little square building here is it's actually an old bottle store. So these were bottle stores that were built in South African townships. Most of them date to around the 1950s and 60s. And they were, these also became incredibly contentious because they're municipally run bottle stores. So these bottle stores or taverns would produce revenue that would go into the city council, but that wasn't used for development of townships days. And that is actually now a backpackers lodge that's run by a local women's collective. So it'd be one happy story to come out of this. Okay, that's what the cultural precinct looks like from the outside as you drive in. So this is the museum inside. That is the library, and that is the art gallery over there. It's a little bit bleak. Okay. And that is the interior of the museum, so that's what you see as you walk in. So there's you can see the materials that were used in the interior as well as the exterior of the building. So the architect, who's a firm called Naomi Roux, was based in Cape Town at the time that they got the commission. Used a lot of, these materials like steel and concrete and red iron that were meant to kind of draw on locally used building materials and this kind of industrial aesthetic because there's a big sort of industrial estate quite close to the museum called the party. So a lot of the materiality as well as the sort of sawtooth design of the roof is meant to draw on this kind of factory architecture, which is linked to Port Elizabeth's industrial heritage. It has the motor manufacturing industry has a strong heritage here, as well as, of course, a very strong history of labour organisation that's related to that. So the kind of central design element of this museum, and one that it was really applauded for and that it won a lot of architectural awards for, including the Rykwert Prize in 2006 and some others, was this idea of the memory box. So there are 12 of these boxes in the museum, and they're massive, like 12 meters by 12 meters. They're really high and kind of moving blank spaces. So this red iron is meant to echo the red iron that was used in replications, original housing stuff. And these are kind of, this is sort of an unusual curatorial approach in a way, compared to memorial museums in Germany. So if you look at the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in the US, where often, what you'll have is a very linear narrative, a kind of chronological narrative, where there's a path that you walk through the museum and you kind of consume the narrative from beginning to end. And the idea of the memory boxes was that they were there would be 12 disparate spaces. And the architect in his writing about this draws a lot on Andreas Hessen's idea of the twilight of memory. So this idea that the space in between the boxes is kind of a space of reflection, and that the narrative in this way is kind of fragmented. So you can go into them in any order, the exhibitions can change periodically. There is a sense, I think, in which the museum, in terms of the product of the museum, has kind of eschewed this traditional form. So the product, in a sense, has been transformed, but this will leave the question of the process by which this thing is put in place, which I would say has not been transformative. This is outside the art gallery, so the middle of the art gallery. So this is all that remains of those original sort of barrack-like houses. This is the one little piece that has been preserved as part of the museum precinct. And this was, there's a very sort of poignant story about this little cottage. Actually, in late 2014, there was this news report in one of the local newspapers about a man called Temba Adams, who had been away from rehabilitation for a long time. He was in prison, and then he was homeless for a while, and then he was staying with family. And eventually in 2014, he came back to rehabilitation to try and move into his house, which was this house. And of course couldn't, because he sort of tried to move in with his bag of belongings, and museum security stopped him and checked him out, because this is now a museum heritage space, no longer a living space. So there's this real sense in which the history of the house as a dwelling has been kind of erased in its transformation into museum object. And you'll note also the African National Congress, the ANC logo here in the African National Congress colours, which actually appeared on the house after it was set up as part of the museum precinct, so it's not original. And so clearly you also meant to mark the space as a piece of African National Congress history very specifically, which has a very strong history in this neighbourhood. And this is what the cottages looked like originally. There were plans to preserve more of them, but because they were so old and they hadn't been maintained, a lot of them actually fell down or collapsed before that could happen in around 2008. And so actually what happened to a lot of them is that people collected steel and iron and carried it off to build new structures elsewhere. And so you still see this kind of red iron, but it's kind of been dispersed into replication. There was a lot of contention around preserving these cottages as well, because for a lot of people who live in replication, there is a sense that they represent a really traumatic history. So do we keep these when these kinds of living conditions really evoke trauma for a lot of people? Why should we keep these terrible, inadequate houses that remind us of this past? Should we not just erase them and build something new? So then who are we writing this memory for? Who are we preserving these objects for? Okay, so as I said at the beginning, there's been a lot of contention around this museum, a lot of protests right from its inception up to the present that have been driven by residents. So in 2003 and 2005, there were a number of protests, both when construction was starting on the museum and just before it opened. And these included these two protests where protested empty buckets of human feces in front of the museum and in the Lord Councillor's office. A very visceral protest, and this was linked to the fact that people were still living without proper sanitation, using this really antiquated bucket system while these new public buildings were being constructed. And there had been this kind of initial negotiation around housing and development, where residents were promised that new houses would be built at the same time as the museum. And so construction started in the museum, and this was not happening. And that's kind of what began to spark these protests in 2003. And they were actually very successful in the sense that they had to halt construction and build a slate of housing and then continue construction on the museum later on. But so these tensions were never really resolved, and there was a real sort of breakdown of trust between local government structures and museum staff and residents that's never really been resolved in any way. A lot of protesters were arrested at this time, so there's now a real mistrust between residents and the kind of ward council system that is meant to be sort of this direct interface of democracy. You know, that ward councillor had protesters arrested. So, and so this all sort of came to a head again in 2013, when there were sort of a number of problems that included the fact that the new art gallery and library had not yet been opened, particularly the library, which is seen as a really important need for the neighbourhood. Residents wanted more employment opportunities at the museum and training for young people from the neighbourhood. But really at the core of these sort of renewed protests in 2013 was a demand to build new housing stock to replace older houses from the late 90s that were now falling apart. And this had been sort of an ongoing negotiation where nothing had moved forward for a very long time. And so what happened is in October 2013 there was this huge protest outside the museum, and the museum was actually shut down, citing fears for the safety of staff and visitors. So as the kind of the only really publicly visible civic building in the area, and as something that's really used by the city in its tourism marketing and on the Elizabeth tourism website, and the museum and the cultural precinct kind of became a residents' leverage in negotiations with the municipality. And so at the time of writing, this hasn't yet been resolved, new houses haven't been built, and reopening the museum doesn't seem likely anytime soon. And that's just, that is an image of the other side of the unopened library, which is very beautiful, but a very beautiful building. I have given this presentation to librarians, which has been okay, so I'm just very quickly in the last sort of 5 minutes, we're going to move on to a very different space or site of memory in Port Elizabeth. So in contrast to the kind of empty museum and this sort of failed utopian project transformation, and this idea of the museum space as a sort of safe container for history. So this is a group of mostly men, some women, called the Amaruto, the Nelson Mandela Day Amaruto, or the Young Lions. And these were a kind of people's youth militia active in Port Elizabeth townships in the 1980s. So there were groups like this all over South Africa in this time, but in Port Elizabeth in particular, the Amaruto organized themselves into really a quasi-military structure that had generals and commanders and this quite complicated system of cells and bases. And these were very young men, mostly, a lot of them were teenagers, some as young as 13, 14, up to their early 20s. So they weren't a kind of official military wing of any of the liberation movements. They were sort of tacitly supported, but not, they were a kind of official body in a way, which has made sort of working with this heritage and this history quite complicated in the present. And they worked with homemade weapons, and they saw their mission as striking against anyone who was seen as supporting the system, so anyone who was seen as a collaborator. This sometimes included white soldiers or police when they came into the townships, but most often the Amaruto's actions were directed against township residents, so people who were suspected of being collaborators or informers, and also local councillors or police who were seen as puppets of the repressive state, of the apartheid state. And the growth of the Amaruto was linked to this call that came from the ANC in exile in 1995 to make South Africa ungovernable as part of the struggle. So this is what they saw as their mission. And they really see themselves as soldiers, as unrecognized combatants. And so what's happened is they, in 2007, 2008, formed themselves into an activist group to agitate for some kind of recognition, to agitate for special pensions of the kind that veterans are entitled to. And this is not a history really that appears in the museum space or in any kind of formalized space of memory. So often the Amaruto will attend kind of public holiday celebrations like this one. So this is the 21st of March, which in South Africa is celebrated as Human Rights Day. It's the anniversary of the 1960 Sharpeville massacre. So they have this banner that they designed with these quite sort of frightening images of burning tire and a petrol bomb and the AK-47 on it. So this is essentially an Amabuso performance that is happening outside the community hall, where the official Human Rights Day celebrations driven by the city council are happening. So on these days they'll perform struggle songs, they will use this a militant dance called the Toi Toi that was very prevalent in African protest in this time, that is still used in protests actually today, and carry this sort of rather incredible banner through the streets. At Nelson Mandela's memorial service, which was in the football stadium in the city centre, the Amabuso were walking around the streets of the North End carrying the banner and singing, so this banner and this kind of performance and the carrying of memory sort of occupies the streets in a very way. And so this is really, these are practices of memory that are very performative, they're embodied, and they're embedded in really ordinary streets and houses and kind of unremarkable street corners. So while the museum, in this case, has sort of more or less failed as a project of memory, it doesn't mean that these memories aren't carried or represented elsewhere. So what do we designate as memorial space and memorial practice, and what counts towards the archive and what doesn't? And so I'm quite interested in this idea of how we might look at the city itself and the streets of the city in these very ordinary spaces as a kind of archive, a space of memory. So these are extracted from some oral history interviews and discussions with some of the Amabuso about some of the kinds of actions that they were undertaking. So the quote at the top was around a discussion of how in the 1980s local councillors would be attacked or would often actually be driven out of the townships altogether because they were seen as collaborating with organs of state. They were not elected councillors. They were put in place by the apartheid state as a means of governing the townships at a localized level. And the second quote is from the former Amabuso general, who's speaking here about the very particular role that the Amabuso were playing. So they would be with the soldiers inside while the leadership was either in exile or in prison. And they were actually very successful in these actions. I mean, they, some of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission testimony, one of the former security police from the Eastern Cape branch in Port Elizabeth actually said that they lost control of Port Elizabeth's townships in 1986, and that was largely due to Amabuso activity. So this is just, a case of one of these kind of very ordinary sites of memory marked as a site of memory. So this is a house which is still a residential home and also a tavern at the back. So this is the Mavela family home. And this is kind of the site of quite a legendary piece of Amabuso history and oral history. So there was a man called Msanqa Lindo, who was the mayor of Ibai townships, of Port Elizabeth townships, also largely seen as a public position, very much a kind of hated position to be in. And so like many councillors and mayors, Linda really came under attack during this period of the 1980s. And so what happened in this space is that Msanqa Linda evicted a woman called Alice Mavela from this house, who owned it, and moved into this house himself. And so the Amabuso have this very dramatic story about how they climbed on the roof and attacked this house from under the cover of night and threw petrol bombs in the window. And Linda was forced to flee, and the house was actually returned to Mrs. Mavela. And he was eventually ousted from the township altogether. So again, this history isn't marked, but there is a township that's going back. song about the story of ousting Linda from this house. And in fact, that song is still used in contemporary protests, except that Linda's name is sometimes replaced in the name of whatever other councillor or politician is unpopular at that moment. So it's very much a kind of living piece of oral heritage. Similarly, this is just a very ordinary residential street, but it's also a site of some really legendary underwater stories of how trenches would be dug in the road and police vehicles would fall in them, and soldiers would be attacked. That wasn't a very common occurrence. The police or army would be directly engaged in this way, but this is, there are at least kind of 3 different versions of the story that I've heard that all have different endings, that are very powerfully located in this place. That history is invisible in public space without some kind of narrative intervention. And just the last slide that I wanted to show you in relation to that Mabuto. So this is a storm drain that was used as an escape route. So if that Mabuto were being chased by police, for example, they would just kind of drop into a manhole and literally just seem to disappear into nowhere and run through the storm drain and come out in this kind of open land, some marshy piece of open land on the outskirts. So I'm gonna just end there, and I think these cases prompt us to think about memory in the spaces that we set aside for memorial practice, and the ways that we carry this memory into the future in the context of a transforming city in a slightly different way. So what happens to this memory in cases where the official spaces for it don't function as such? It's clearly, the memory of this time is clearly still very present and active. So the monument might be abandoned or empty, but the practice of memory remains very much alive. And it also remains very much present in and invoked by the contemporary landscape. So how does one mark that? How do you acknowledge that in those kinds of spaces? And I think there's also a question here, especially related to the museum, this idea that memory and heritage can somehow be used instrumentally to change the shape of the city or the fabric of the city in the name of development. So what do we preserve and for who, and who is meant to consume this history? And then I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.